Hey everyone, welcome to Birth Podcast. I'm Ash. Today I am bringing you Courtney Christenson. She is an incredibly intelligent woman who I learned about a few years ago when she was working for an organization that I often did a lot of ride-alongs with in Iraq. And over those past few years, we've slowly gotten to know each other and become friends, and she's an incredible activist and writer, and really is contributing to a lot of conversations around women. It's really an incredible opportunity to have you with me today. So I'm really glad that you're here. And
thank you so much for having me, Ash. It's an honor to be here with you.
So I'm just kind of curious, on the day that the decision came down from the Supreme Court, what did you feel?
Ooh, that was a rough day. I think I do my best these days to not despair and to retain hope, but that was a hard day. I think there were so many feelings of discouragement, of anger, rage, fear, all of these negative emotions for myself, for my sisters across the country, and for my daughters. I have two daughters who are 11 and 13, and the idea that they are growing up with fewer rights than I had is tragic and wrong and unacceptable. And so I think on the day that decision came down, even though we knew it was coming, right? I decided that I needed to give myself space to grieve and be outraged about it all. So I took half a day to just be angry and sad, and I think that was helpful for me. And then we get back to it.
I hear you. I think one of the more interesting things that day is that we knew it was coming, but we didn't maybe necessarily anticipate the impact. That actually hearing it would be. You and I grew up in similar systems, particularly in evangelical America, that for many years preached that they were going to do this. This is something that we've known for, in a way, for decades. It was in the subtle messaging about, shaming, just not only just shaming abortion, but I think the creating women as sort of a second class. And it was always in the subtleties, right? It was never anything. Some places it was blatant, but I certainly went to a church in Colorado where there was a lot of blatant conversation around it. But there was also a lot of just subtleties in whether it was women in leadership, whether it was abstinence teaching, whether you talked about sex at youth group, which we did. I remember being a teenager, and once a year we would separate into two different groups, girls and boys. Sure. And there was this entire conversation about kind of our purity and how it was all put on us. I remember going to camp and we had to put t-shirts on. So there was always a lot of shame around our body. And then there was also messaging that was politicized, that, taking America back for God or whatever, that this was a part of that conversation. And so it's like, we have this knowledge that this was always the goal.
Yeah.
But to feel it happening, I think was sad and devastating, because you almost hold out for a little bit of hope that it won't.
Right. That it won't. Yeah, sure. And I think for me, it was a really interesting sort of thing as well, because I did grow up in that same culture that you're describing. I resonate with all of that. But having grown up very conservative evangelical, I also was on the other side of this issue for a lot of years. And so for me to have grown up, I took whole classes on how to argue against abortion and these sorts of things, and voted that way for too many years that I deeply regret looking back now. But that was the world that I was born into, and it took me a while to transition out of it. And so I think for me to then have this reaction to Roe being overturned and just being devastated by it, it took me off guard a little bit, how deeply I felt it. As I've gone through the last a decade of kind of understanding my view of women and the view of women that I was given, and really like sort of dealing with and healing from those intrinsic, implicit biases against women and shame about my body and all of these things that I was given, having torn those things down and then experiencing this in addition to that and being like, oh, there's so much violence here against women and against women's bodies, and it just feels like this power grab and this like another effort to control me and my daughters and women as a whole. And I think all of that kind of came crashing down. And it was a lot bigger than I anticipated, like feeling these huge things and all of the, it wasn't just Roe, it's like all the other implications of this decision and its impact on women. And that's even as someone who's not really affected by this personally. I live in Oregon, where abortion rights are protected in the state constitution, which I'm really grateful for. But to just feel this for my sisters around the nation, especially women who are going to be more affected by this, low-income women, Black and Brown women, Indigenous women who are trans women who are, going to be affected by this violence against women's bodies. It was this huge thing that kind of spiraled in my mind on that day that the decision came down.
I'm kind of curious for you. I know that I've shared my story on social media a couple of times, just talking about actually having gone through what I think religious people would like to call a miscarriage, but really what that is an accidental abortion. But and I've talked about the idea that for me there was a lot of mental work about whether or not I would have one, whether or not I would choose, and I went back and forth up until the very day that it actually happened. And even though I went through postpartum and was grieving when I was very early on in my early 20s, it was still something that like I was deeply relieved from, because of the circumstances for which I was surrounded. And so there's an impact around my body, not just in that perspective, but have also been a survivor. I understand what it's like to believe that my body is not my own and having to reclaim my own body. So I'm kind of curious that as your evolution has sort of taken place, like, have there been a multitude of things? Have there been other things that you've moved through that you have felt, whether it's been directly impacted on you, maybe it's someone maybe it's, questions that your daughters have brought to you, but what have been some highlights in your life that have kind of brought this to your attention that were like, oh, wait a minute, this way that we grew up really wasn't okay?
Right. Yeah, well, I think for me, it was this expectation that women orient their lives around other people's needs and desires, whether it's always patriarchal. So whether that's their father or their husband or their son or whoever, but that women's lives and bodies are not their own. And I mean, for me, it was honestly that I just failed at this spectacularly. Like I tried really hard to be the kind of woman that my subculture told me I needed to be. And it turns out I'm incapable of being anyone other than who I am. And, at some point when you fail for over a decade at something, I had to stop and question, like, am I broken or is the system broken? Like, is this something that's wrong with me, or is there something wrong with the expectation that I am not my own? And that was sort of asking that question was sort of what opened a door to a different journey away from some of the harmful ideologies and patriarchal subculture that I grew up in of white evangelical Christianity. And that leads directly to this issue of women's bodies belonging to themselves, of reproductive rights and freedoms and abortion rights. And so I think asking that question, like, whose am I? You know, and I am my own.
Whose am I? I am my own. It's hitting me in a really big way, because I think that our journey as women, our healing, and you mentioned healing earlier, our healing is deciding that I am my own, that my body is my own, that my sexuality is my own, that my healthcare is my own. It is my decision. How I express myself, how I decide what my orientation is, what label or no label do I want to put on that, what is my template for love and sex and care, and what is my template for just understanding myself, right? I think each one of us have kind of a method in which helps us, and whether that's through storytelling or whether that's through how we show up in the world, or, you know, the kinds of relationships we choose and so forth, you know, friends, lovers, partners. It's how do I want to show up, and am I going to show up as I own myself, or as if I belong to someone else?
Yeah.
And even in committed relationships, you still have to have the power of you, and be you, right? And without that, even that relationship is disjointed and dismembered, right? And disembodied, essentially. And women have been disembodied by patriarchal systems, told to ignore and shame. And that's not something I want to ever visit again in my life. You know what I mean? I take pride in saying that I am my own.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's just it's so tragic now to like have laws on the books in so many places in the United States right now that reject that statement. You know, that there's women in so many states that cannot say I am my own completely. You know, I actually just had an experience the other day that brought this kind of crashing in on me. So I was at the doctor's the other day for a routine scan, and I'm sitting in the waiting room of a radiologist, and this girl came in and sat next to me, who was 9 months pregnant, just ready to pop. And I say girl because she was a child. She could not have been more than 15, but she looked more like 13 or 14 to me. And I have a 13-year-old. Like, I'm familiar with children and how they look. She was just a baby, and she was there with her mom, who looked about my age, you know, late 30s. And I was so angry. I was so angry at her mom, at that girl's mother, for making her do that, because there's no world in my mind in which that child would choose that, knowing what it was going to do to her little tiny child body. And they're just, girls need to grow up knowing that they belong to themselves, that their bodies belong to themselves, that they have autonomy to make choices about their bodies, even as children. And I think it was just this moment of being like, that's like this system that we're raising girls in, that say your body, like, I make choices about your body on behalf of someone that's not you, to prioritize I'm going to make choices about your body that prioritize the well-being of other people is wrong. It's unjust. And it just breaks my heart, Ash. Like, I just get so emotional about it.
As you should, my friend, because, you know, I think this is, and you're touching on something that's deeply emotional, that's breaking my own heart, in the sense that the healing and the justice begin not in our arguments about, well, what is a fetus, and what is, you know, that, like, these mechanical facts or figures, or which culture has this value, which religion has this value, and so on and so forth. Because that's a lot of what the debates are happening online. The debates and happening online are all like trying to, like, everybody's trying to throw facts at each other and numbers at each other. Okay, fine. Those things are all true. But to me, none of it is going to shift anybody until, especially the women who are anti-abortion, none of it is going to shift until they have a real moment of self-reflection. And even for the women who are pro-choice in the political world, there has to be an ultimate self-reflection of, does my body belong to me? What does it feel like? Do I feel like I have a choice? Do I feel like I have to please somebody? Not in service of relationship. I'm talking about, do I have a choice to be who I want to be, to express who I want to be, to wear what clothes I want to wear, to, you know, to do my hair a certain way, to, you know, to express my artistry in a certain way? Do I have the ability to look at my body in the mirror and like myself? Do I have that much confidence in me? What are my insecurities? And I'm not saying that everyone doesn't have insecurities, but until women can look at our bodies and be able to say, this is mine.
Yeah.
Nobody's opinion is going to change. Enough women have to feel it. You know, I had a friend who said the other day, she said that, you know, there can't really be pleasure without choice. There cannot be,
that's profound.
There has to be choice.
Yeah.
And that's what we need. We need choice so that we can have pleasure.
Well, and I think none of that will change, though, right? Until we examine what we value about women. Because right now, women's pleasure is not a priority for anyone, even most women. Like, it's not, like, I don't know very many women who consider, like, what would bring me pleasure today in how they set up their lives or schedule their day, or make life choices. Like, that's not something that women are taught to value for themselves, and surely no one else values that for women. Like, just in general, the things that our American culture values about women are not the things that are good for women. And they're not humanizing either, right? It's our appearance, it's the way we provide sexual gratification, it's birthing, it's these sorts of things that we value in women, motherhood and sex appeal, and being pleasant for other people.
But there isn't being there. I think that's perfectly said. Being pleasant for other people, and I'm tired of being pleasant. In general, right? There's a difference between being nice and being kind, and I'm not going to be nice anymore. Because my niceness is made based off of a fakeness, to make a system palpable, and I don't care about the system being palpable. I want me. And so if that means that I have to be what the patriarchy would call, you know, a bitch, or having a resting bitch face, or, you know, being too loud or too much or whatever, then I'm fine. We have to value pleasure in ourselves, though, first, because I don't think anybody's going to value it until we value it in ourselves.
100%.
And you are right, and say that the institutionalized system doesn't value women in general, let alone Black and Brown and Indigenous and Hispanic women are not valued.
Absolutely.
You know, I mean, I'll bring this as kind of throwing into the greater conversation, but right now we have a Black woman in Russia who has been arrested on alleged drug charges, and Russia thought they were getting a big NBA or WNBA star. But I was reading a good analysis, I think, from the LA Times at one point that said she's Black, she's a woman, she's LGBTQ, and she's a WNBA, which does not get the kind of value and sponsorship and promotion and equality and equity that the NBA does. And as a result, we don't care about her. It's crickets. So it's situations like that we don't value women, and we especially don't value BIPOC women. Yeah. And I think that as women, we have to come together and, one, value ourselves, but then two, value each other and lift each other up. And right now, I think there's a lot of people split, a lot of women split on this issue. We were told not to value ourselves. Like, our bodies were not ours, our bodies were to be submissive. And pleasure only came in submission. Yeah. And I think it's time we've stopped being submissive, even subconsciously.
Yeah. No, I agree completely. And I actually think the dismissal of the value of Black and brown and queer women is also, like, it is a problem amongst, Republican women who are invested in keeping systems the way that they are because they benefit from them. But I am going to say too, like, this is a huge problem amongst Democrat women and liberals and progressives, and white feminism leaves out all of those groups of people, and has historically through every part of the women's movement, from suffrage to the women's liberation movement to modern feminism. And the fact that like the Brittany Griner case is not getting the focal points that we need, is like, it doesn't affect white women. Like, she's not one of us, and like, she's not white, she's not straight, so it decenters her from the movement, and it just doesn't have the same value. It doesn't mobilize people in the same way, and that is unjust, and that is something that needs to be reflected on by women in all political parties, of all political persuasions, to say, how can we, like, Black and brown women have been telling us this for decades, if not centuries, like, that if we center their voices and their needs, then of course, obviously, white women's needs will be met as well. But by centering white voices, their needs are left out, and their value is never brought up to be valued by the culture the same way that white cis lives are.
I've been kind of learning is that when we look at the turn of the 20th century, there was actually male thinkers of the time who really thought that our only value, even as white women, was to just preserve race, but that our brains and our bodies were really not any different than, say, Black women or brown women. And it's interesting because it means that essentially a lie or a gaslight was established that we would gain power by hanging on the coattails of white patriarchal systems, but we weren't being valued either. We weren't being valued anyway. It was just sort of the lie to sort of keep us close so that we would continue to do, quote unquote, the right things for the male dominated structure that was being continually built and maintained. We have to stop believing the lie as white women. We have to stop believing the gaslight. And that is a space where we've been disembodied, and we have to step back into our embodiment in order for that to heal for ourselves. And by doing that, we can then abolish what has been actually a racist feminist system. But I think we go back to the very heart of the story that you told about being angry at that mother, allowing her child to not have a choice. So how then, in this desire to create solution, and to create forward movement, do we reach ourselves? Because it is a collective. It's not just me reaching them, it's reaching ourselves, right? They are part of me, I am part of them. How do we do that? How do we get there?
I think the first question comes back more to power, in the sense that I think white women in particular, we've been told this story and have believed this lie that the only way for us to gain power is through proximity to white patriarchy. And so we draw closer, or we leverage our position within white patriarchy to gain power, thinking that's our only way, because we lack any belief in our own ability to embody power without white patriarchy. And so to come back and say, where does the power come from? Like, where do I gain power? I gain it from within myself.
I think I would encourage any woman listening to this today, where you are, sit with a journal, sit with a piece of paper, sitting on your yoga mat, wherever you are, and ask yourself, how do I feel powerful? Where does that power come from? How does it manifest in my actions? And how does it manifest in my body? In other words, when you feel anger, do you feel it in your chest, in your back, in your stomach? Where do you carry it? And then unravel that story, because it has to ultimately lead to, whose am I? So before we get there, how do I feel power? I don't know. I mean, I think maybe that's where we begin. Sit with yourself and unravel this one. Tell me a little bit about some of the work that you are doing, at least maybe with other women, whether it's collective, whether it's in your writing. I'd be really interested for you to kind of also just promote yourself, give yourself a little bit of self-love.
I'm
so
bad
that
at that.
can find you and join this conversation with you.
Yeah, I mean, I think my work right now is focused on helping myself and the women around me discover our own power, value ourselves for who we are, rather than for all the things that culture tells us we're valuable for, as we've discussed. And so I've done a series of small online groups with other women to go through a workbook that I created that helps women discover what they are really passionate about and figure out how to engage in those issues. And then in my writing, I'm trying to be helpful in the sense of bringing new ways of looking at complex issues that helps us think, that helps us engage more effectively in the issues that we care about and in the issues that are shaping the world around us. I'm just such a believer in the power of women to shape culture, to shape socioeconomics, to shape how our world looks, and to shape the justice movement in the world. And especially by recognizing the role that we already play in it. And that's a big part of my work, is helping women who look like me to recognize the role we have in the world and how we can leverage that for good. And
what's your website, your Instagram, your Instagram handle?
Yeah, so website is sparksandmatches.com, and my Instagram handle is sparksandmatches. You can also find me on Facebook if you're still on that platform. But Instagram or my website, and
I will put all of that stuff in the description box so y'all can find it. And if any of you are listening to this today and you really would like to share your story, or you have questions or thoughts or want to unpack, both Courtney and I would welcome the opportunity to learn from you and understand you, and create space, for your voice. So I will also put like our contact pages in the description box as well, and so that you can reach out through her site and through mine. And you are more than welcome to send us your stories if you like. Thank you for having this conversation with me. I love talking to you, and it's kind of nice to just pop up and just talk.
Yeah. Thanks
and
so much for
unravel
having
this.
me.
This is the work.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Thank you so much, Ash.
All right, everyone. I hope that you have an incredible rest of your day. Share this with everyone, and may you live and move and have your being. Cheers.